PlayStation has pretty much grown synonymous with gaming at this point. The console is a juggernaut in the industry, and every PlayStation has done great. Yes, even the PS3, which you know was the PS3, but it somehow did better than the Xbox 360. What? But even though the PlayStation 3 wasn't a great console, the consoles before it and after it were, and no PlayStation would be a PlayStation without the PlayStation 1. The PS1 was a beast of a plastic box in its time, and no other PlayStations would exist if the old grandpappy PlayStation 1 wasn't so dominant in the 5th generation. Sony had quite the balls to enter an already heated battle with Sega and Nintendo in the console industry, and the hype for a new console generation was real, because the technology now enabled 3D gaming. But luckily for Sony and the PlayStation, this was a period where Sega really began to shit themselves, and Sonic wasn't so good anymore, and the Sega Saturn also sold badly bad anywhere else that wasn't Japan. And on Nintendo's front, they released the N64 whole 2 years after the PS1, which was a real kick in the dick, and naturally therefore Nintendo got their ass whooped by Sony. But how and why was the PS1 so dominant in its debut generation? Well, that's due to a lot of things, but let's start from the beginning. In the early 1990s, Nintendo and Sony collabed on making a CD-ROM peripheral for the SNES, which failed to come to fruition due to, capitalism and business. So Sony used the now scrapped idea to create a new console, and they gave birth out of their technological womb to the PS1, which was released in the winter of 1994 for Japan and the fall of 95 for North America, Europe, and Australia. Sony's decision to break into the gaming industry was a really big ball move, to say the least, and I think that nobody saw that the PS1 would blow both Nintendo and Sega out of the water. But why and how? Well, first, the PS1 was affordable. Comparing it to the competition and comparing it to the Saturn especially, it was a whole $100 cheaper. The games for the PS1 were also cheaper to make and to sell. They would sell for around $40, which is almost half as less comparing it to the N64's hefty $60 price tag, and that's all because of the revolutionary CD. Wow, look at it in all its shining and easily scratchable glory. The CD was an absolute game changer. It costed only $1 to make, which was laughably cheap when you looked at the N64 cartridges took a whole whopping $30 to make. Oh, and the CD could also store as 10 times much more data on it than a shitty cartridge, with a game pack in addition, which is just insane, no offense to Kanye West. This was great for the PS1 because the games for it were easier to make because of the huge amount of data, and this appealed to some companies as well, especially to Square Enix, for example, which really wanted to squeeze any bit of data the CD had for their new Final Fantasy entry. The PlayStation 1 also had great audio quality thanks to the CD, which some games like Metal Gear Solid thrived off of. The N64 did make it harder to, pirate stuff with their cartridges, but it really wasn't that great for the time. Also, while the N64's controller looked like a Devil's Classic Triton, the design of the controller for the PS1 was sleek, with 2 big sticks. I mean, really, the DualShock controller is a great controller. It's really that good that the design changed very slightly throughout the ages, with the new controllers only being wireless, having smaller sticks, different bumper pads, and a touchpad. For 3 generations, the controller was pretty much the same. The PS1 truly is a perfection design-wise. It was that good that Sony just decided to play it safe and not change it much for generations, which was a total opposite looking at Nintendo, which just says fuck it, ship it, and changes shit every generation now, for better or for worse. The PlayStation 1 also had a bunch of conveniences, like being able to watch DVDs, Netgear where users could make their own games, game demos, and more, which really appealed to the public. The PlayStation also appealed much more to older audiences. Comparing it to the N64, it seemed like a more mature console option, while the N64's games looked more cartoony, colorful, and they were for kids. The PS1's games were murky, dark, with more adult content to it, more horror, blood, and things like that. Speaking of games, the game library that the PS1 has is really good, which makes sense because anyone who could rumble with N64's amazing video game library was doing something right. Every game genre has its place on the PlayStation, and the games are freaking great. You want platforming? Boom! You got Crash Bandicoot, rhythm games, Parappa the Rapper and Whip Ribbon are there, baby. Fighter? You ever heard of fucking Tekken? Collectathon, Spyro, Puzzle, you got Karishi or IQ if you're American. Horror games, Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and if you really wanna shit your pants, just play Abe's Odyssey. RPG, Final Fantasy. Action, Metal Gear Solid and Tomb Raider. Racing, Boom, CDR and Forza. The PS1 has a list of amazing game franchises which just cements its place on the throne even more. There is just a crazy diversity out there, and even though some haven't stood the test of time and look, well, like a local gas pump's bathroom, they still have a huge following. But the PlayStation 1 wasn't without its flaws. It was graphically much weaker than the N64. The models on the N64 looked much better than PS1's models, where the N64's models were colorful and clean. The PS1's were, as previously said, dark and textured. Even though the CD was a great thing and cheap to make, the cartridges had 100 times faster transfer speed, making N64 games action-packed, and games like Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, and Super Mario 64 thrived on the console. The PlayStation 1 also had pussy scale on the controller port number, with 2, whereas the N64 had 4 chat controller holes. PS1's reputation has kind of been diminishing with time as well, whether it would be with the bad aging of games or the quick cash grab that was the PS1 classic. But yeah, the PS1 had its flaws, but what it did for Sony and for the consoles later is short of incredible, and it also did all of that in its debut generation. It's undoubtedly one of the greatest and most revolutionary consoles ever, and that's why the PS1 deserves its place on the throne of the 5th generation.